I've been looking forward to this for several months today. My pleasure today to introduce to you Dr. Saunders and to get this book launched. Before I do that, I've got a couple of quick announcements I should acknowledge. First of all, some special guests. Giuseppe Pandolfini de Ronaldez, partner, daughter, Paulina, here in the front. Also say thanks to, I lost track of Pam and Lainey is somewhere. Thank you guys for organizing us today. Also, thanks to Dining Services for snacks, as well as to Kim's Cupcakery for snacks. Last summer, Dr. Saunders, last summer, Stephanie came by to me and said, very casually, so I wrote this novel. Bold, out of the blue. I mean, she said it as if it were not even something she had to make eye contact about, like it was something like, you know, like she was saying she was late coming from parties or something like that. Of course, writing a novel is not a casual thing. It's a thing that people usually go to school for. It's a thing that people usually spend a full-time professional level of attention to do. And here she has pulled off this magic trick that she'll be discussing with us today. A quick word to our students. When we talk about the values of lifelong learning, that is, in addition to the value of this particular novel, what she has demonstrated for us today. Covered Buttons turns out to be a very compelling Bildungs Roman. My English students, what does Bildungs Roman mean? Somebody help me out here, Glenn. In which, you start to learn the adult world, decipher its mysteries, find your place in it all. As an added bonus, the author happens to be a friend and colleague and mentor to many of us in this room here. Let's find a seat open. There's a seat here. Somebody help us out. Who all has a seat open? Anybody? Okay. Let me give a short biography here of our author. Stephanie is raised in Salem, Arkansas, graduated from Lyon in 2002, graduating summa cum laude with degrees in Spanish and psychology. After completing a PhD in Kentucky in 2009 and building a distinguished career profile at Capital University in Ohio, she returned to Lyon College in 2022. She's made a huge impact in a short amount of time here, as I think we can all agree. She's quickly become a pillar of the Spanish department. She's revitalized the Honors Fellows program, and she's brought us here together today. A quick couple of things about how this is going to work. I am almost done talking, I swear. Stephanie will come up to the front. She will provide a reading, a synopsis first, a reading second, and then a little bit of discussion of her historical research that informs the book. Then I'll host some Q&A. I'm going to put students on notice from the first. I'm going to be calling on you guys first before our faculty. I know how you guys defer to the grown-ups, and we're not doing that today. On notice. Also, those of us who have had an opportunity to read this novel in advance, I'm going to ask us to avoid plot spoilers during the course of that discussion. We'll have a book signing. There's cake and snacks. So please welcome Dr. Saunders.
Being here today. Thank you, Dr. Bill, Pam, Lainey, IT, Dining Services, everyone for organizing this, all the details, my colleagues in Spanish, my students for helping carry books over and set things up, Paulina for unwrapping and her books, right? She was tireless with that as well. You probably wish you were listening to Dr. Bill right now. Sorry about the voice. Ozarks allergies is right on cue, right? So wonderful students left me vitamin C drops by my door, so really grateful for that. Thank you all for being here today. You're really special to me. I started here 4 years ago, and this is my first graduating class, even a gift. But I can't quite put into words. But anyway, I will try. So, Dr. Bill, he stepped through because I was going to do the same thing and tell you what I was going to talk about, so you wouldn't be like, when is this lady going to stop croaking? But it's going to be short because I want you all to have time to ask questions and such. So, Covered Buttons, here's the novel. It is the story told by Thea. She's 17 years old, and she is growing up in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains. Her mother passed away in childbirth, and she's helping her father raise a 2-year-old brother. And she's watching as many of her friends have moved off, and they've got married, they're having their own families. She's graduated from 8th grade, the highest level that she could in the region at the time. And she's wanting something else, but she doesn't quite know what. Her father wants her to be able to spread her proverbial wings, and he doesn't want her just tethered down to raising her youngest brother. So he marries a woman named Helen Smith, and Helen brings a number of new ideas into the household, namely through books and reading. And another important figure that comes into Thea's life with this marriage is her new step-grandmother, Betsy. And Betsy, for those who have read the novel, she's a bit of it. She almost like took over the whole novel. She's really kind of pushy, gritty. She's a little bit of a fan favorite. She gets into your heart. But she brings a lot of new ideas as well, namely through the grassroots birth control movement at that time. And so those are some of the conflicts, as Ellen would say, that Thea's facing. I'm going to read a very short passage, and I'm committing a really bad error that I acknowledge, that every writer will tell you should always start at the beginning so you don't have to give backstory. I can't do that because the preface involves singing. And if I sing, everybody, there would be a mass exodus. So, especially if it's voice, but even if the voice was end of the first chapter, okay? And so this is right after Helen and Pa or Stephen have gotten married, and there's been a big shindig at Betsy's house. And so this is the scene that follows. The next morning, I didn't follow Betsy's advice about cooking for fear of waking Pa. I couldn't stop worrying. It was the first time I'd ever been up before him. Even with his yearly bout of gripe, he always made it out before 8. I was sitting on the edge of the porch when Helen walked up and offered me her hand. "Let's go read," she said with a smile. I followed her to a big oak tree and waited for her to spread out her quilt. I noticed how my new stepmother's normally drab, straight hair laid in curls from the previous day's twisting alignment. Now she looked carefree, and I envied her. The only way change entered my life was clawing and clinging to what I always knew. Helen was in a new house with a new husband and child, and I didn't detect a trace of worry on her for how things would turn out. They just were. Helen just was. I made myself comfortable on the quilt, leaning back on my elbows with my legs stretched out and ankles crossed. I thought Helen would sit on the quilt beside me, but instead she nestled between 2 tree roots like they were made for her form. Then she pulled out a book and began to read aloud. It was The Secret Garden, and I was surprised her voice changed as she read, her accent, same as any around, ironing itself out. After a few minutes, Helen paused and looked at me as if waiting for a reaction. "Where'd you get a book like that?" I asked. There were not too many books in our parts outside the New King James Version of the Bible. Helen smiled, and Helena. For as long as I remember, she promised reading would get me out of anything. "Let me show you a little secret." I straightened my posture, intrigued. From a small satchel, she reached over and pulled out an autocolite, which most people know is Arkansas stone. "Aunt Helena gave me this," she said. I nodded. 2. My aunt used to always say, "A mind can become dull like a butcher's knife, but all you need is to take out a book and read. It's like running the blade over an autocolite. It'll cut like me. I want you to have it." She held out the stone towards me. I looked up at her in disbelief. She lost me with all that talk about the mind being like a blade, but she got my attention with the mention of a gift. I didn't receive many of those. "I can't take that." "You can and you will. You can't give back a gift," Helen said as she got up and carried the stone over to me. "And besides, you've got to teach me how to cook." I smiled, relaxing. "Sounds like that won't be easy." Helen let out a cackle that reminded me of Betsy. I can promise you it won't be. I need to ask you something, I said, gaining courage from her easy demeanor. Go right ahead. What do you want me to call you? By my name? Paul's not going to like that. It's too informal. He'll think I'm disrespecting you. It doesn't matter if he likes it or not. What you call me is between you and me. I fiddled with the cold, smooth stone in my hand, thinking it over. It'll be different for us all, Helen said, seeming to read my hesitation with our new situation. I reckon it will. Suddenly, I heard a retching sound and shot up to see Pa at the porch, his torso draped over like a tinted sheet. I started towards him. Wait, Helen said. I stopped and turned around. Helen caught up with me and said in a hushed tone, "Don't be embarrassed if you see him this way." How do you know? I've been around enough liquor to know. I shook my head. I can just stand here. But I didn't have time to wait for long. I heard Pa yell, "My God, I need some food." I walked as quickly as I could back to the house, marveling over this different Pa, this new grandmother, this new stepmother, or maybe Pa sat with his head in his hands as I fried and baked, and Helen chased Jacob in the yard. When we all sat at the table to eat, Pa broke his silence, saying to no one in particular, or maybe it was just a confirmation to himself, "I ain't ever going to rot out my guts again." Thank God, I thought, because my Pa, my handsome Pa, smelled worse than any Hawkwind in the air. Novel, I started it only 13 years ago. Don't be impressed by how speedy I am. I didn't only work on it, as Dr. Bill mentioned, for that amount of time. My background is in Hispanic literature, and it's not in creative writing, even though it's always been something that I've been very drawn to. I recently had an interview with Cassidy for the podcast, and I was telling her that it's almost like the 6 degrees of seven. Kevin Bacon, isn't that the way it goes? I feel like I could be 6 degrees of wine. Like I could trace my career back to here. So many professors that made such an impact. But also my experience with writing creatively for the Wheelbarrow. Dr. Murray is here today. We've got the launch tomorrow, shameless plug, right? So that I wrote poetry in Spanish, and many of my students are carrying along that tradition, and I'm so proud of that, and short stories. And so, but I stopped that a long time ago because I was once told that it wasn't the best idea to write in one second language when it came to artistic flow. I followed that advice, which was not great because I should have just kept on writing. That's the key, just keep on doing, right? And then in 2013, a friend asked me to do a novel writing challenge, and I did. And I didn't finish the novel at that time, but I don't give up very easily. So I set it aside for a number of years while I was doing my academic books and articles and such, that it was like the characters just kept tapping me on the shoulder, and I couldn't let it go. And I knew I wanted to finish it. If I started it and had a connection with it, I wanted to finish it. And so in Ohio, it was around 2020. I keep better records now because I've gone back to writing, but I picked it up again. And I was researching the best I could from there. It was during the pandemic, of course, and then any time that I would come home, it was just all about being with my family. So I didn't take time to come and dig in archives yet. But I was reading Dr. Bevens' books on Ozarks history. I was, any archives that I could get from the Butler Center or the Arkansas, the U.S. The Congress, anyway, the pictures in the Library of Congress. Anything that was available digitally, I was going after it, and I really set out to write a novel that looked at migration. And there are some migrant stories in this. Arkansas has a long tradition. My family was part of that, of the fruit pickers. But it went in a different direction. Through research, I came across, I was researching a scene that didn't even make it into the final version of the novel. I don't know how many times I've rewritten this, but it's been countless, and so lots of different versions. But with that, I came across the grassroots birth control movement in the state. And research was carried out by Dr. Lyon, and she's a historian in Tennessee. Not much has been written about this besides her work. She did a dissertation and has published a couple of chapters over it, but it's not been written about extensively, but it's a really amazing story. So basically there was a group of Little Rock club women that in 1931 started to lobby for women's reproductive health in the state. In 1873, there was the Comstock Act was passed, and that prohibited the dissemination, the mailing of any information about contraceptives in the United States. So really, that it was a very taboo topic, that a lot of doctors, couldn't quite get behind. And so these women, they worked on a volunteer basis and tirelessly, volunteered in their community with local pastors, a rabbi, right, and really brought community together. And so in 1936 is when the Comstock Act was overturned by the United States versus one package. But, in the process, Dr. Lyon had uncovered a number of letters that had been written by these women that were in need of help, and often their husbands as well. So in order to have access to contraception, the women needed to come to the clinic in Little Rock that was open around at the beginning, an hour and a half a week. Again, volunteer basis for the women that were helping as well as the physicians. And they needed to be married under a certain economic level, which that was pretty easy because over half of the state was, the majority of the state was under half of what the rest of the United States was as far as that goes, or dealing with some really grave health concerns. And so these women wrote in asking for help. I kind of mimic this in the novel. I'm going to read one short letter just so you can get a feel for what these letters, a lot of times they have lots of grammatical errors or spelling mistakes, but this is from a woman from Mount Olive. I'm appealing to you to give me information concerning the terribly poor. We have 4 children, oldest 8.5 years, baby 12 months. I live in terror that I will become pregnant again. I honestly do believe that I will die if I give birth again. We do not have enough to eat, never have milk. Life is just a dull, drab ache of fear. My husband is now a WPA worker, and he has no work for a year and a half. He has only drawn one WPA check. Will you please tell me where, if possible, I can buy whatever contraceptives that are safe and how much they cost? My doctor says he does not know. I do not think it is fair to all concerned to have more children. So, a number of these letters came in. Also, the correspondence is back from Mrs. Cornish, the one that was the founder of the clinic. And they were just all very heartbreaking, right? Women, and also, again, men, in some instances, do well for their families or to protect their health. And so part of this novel, the picture on it is a picture of my paternal grandmother, Saunders, for whom Paulina is named. She was, like many of probably your grannies, just a very important part of my life. I didn't have a lot of access to books and growing up, and I would listen to her tell stories over and over again of her life. And so a lot of times when I was listening to stories of her life, if I had a question, she would say, that's just the way it was done, all right? It was before Google. Now when I tell Paulina, our daughter, I don't know, she'll say Google it, or would you text Cassia if it's a biology question? So she's got a very specific network of questions, and I didn't have access to that. So some of from, my great-grandfather drove a team of mules, he didn't drive a car. How would they even get to Little Rock, right? That was like the big city. How would they even hear about those things? And so the part that, really took over for the novel was Betsy. She's this kind of underground person that helps the women along the way. I just want to conclude before we start the question and answers to say I see means a lot. I get to have one of you all in class. Some of you have not gotten the privilege to have in class. And to echo a bit of what Dr. Bill was saying, but I can't tell you enough how that the power of a liberal arts education will set you up for being able to be a lifelong learner and really digging deep into what lies on your heart. And if I could tell you 3 quick tips along the way for either the stage you're at right now or something you're really passionate about that you think, I can't wait to serve before I do it, it's to contact the big people. They often respond. Sometimes you get crickets, but along the way, the people that you think are like, whoa, they also are really interested in, what they're passionate about. And sometimes they're going to give you some really amazing information. Talk to people. I found this I always tell you all I'm a skills junkie, and I like to go into things and learn new skills. People, those one-on-one conversations will give you a lot more than you can find in any other medium, really. And the final thing is the slogan that we used last semester for my creative writing class is just show them. The muses, the inspiration, the days where we're going to feel like doing something, they don't come too often. But you put an hour and you show up every day and you can really do what you set out to do.
I want to hold space open for our students to ask some questions first. Who'd like to start us? Do that.
So I have a question more about you, like as a writer. Do you plan on doing any more fictitious work or any other work in the future, or is this kind of like
One-off. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for asking me, Jason. Yeah, I've got the book. So I've got a draft of another novel set in the Ozarks that is, who knows how many rewrites that awaits it. I find this really fulfilling, and like I can tap into a level of subconsciousness that I find really exciting. So.
Hold that space for 2 more.
No pressure.
Okay, so can you give us a little background about your writing, how you get into that writing mindset, like early warning, what step
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So when I mentioned that I've gone back to writing by hand, because I wrote a novel on Word the way that, one does, I guess. And I followed it for a long time. Started this process super seriously. I went into listening to and reading, the secret, and I saw many common denominators of writing novels out by hand. And of course, I always tell my students to learn the vocabulary, right? And I'm like, why didn't I do this? But so that is something really important. I often, and this is a lot of just being a mother, I try to, the real new writing stuff needs to be about 4 or 5 minutes. My dog's there, and I'm writing by hand with some coffee. And then I can do some editing while our lovely city is on in the background. And I'm getting up to do things and change laundry and stuff like that. But the real work needs to be, and as daily as possible. I always tease because I quote George Saunders a lot, and he's not here to me, unfortunately, but he's an amazing American writer, and he has a book called A Swim in the Pond of Rain, and he talks about like the radical nature of revision and how that, you know, like this book took 13 years, so, you know, that's like from kindergarten to high school, right? So all the Stephanies that showed up, you know, and that being like, it being almost like a slow arts process, and how that, you know, it speeds up opportunities and such.
In some of the creative writing classes I've gotten to take with you, we talk a lot about how like writing can be sort of like an expression of like part of your identity. So what are some ways, maybe like some ways if you're in like the main character of this novel or other characters of the novel that you kind of find parts of like your own identity?
That's a great question. Yeah, so much is almost like parts have been put in a blender or something like that. You know, like there's not just one character. People always like, oh, are you, or is your grandma? And it's really not that. But definitely, I think when you all read it, you'll be like, oh, that's a program thing or something like that. Who was I? Oh, I can't say, but I'm going to mess up. But anyway, I was listening to an interview recently that was talking about anybody who's lived past childhood has enough material to write a novel, and there is so much into that of tapping into all those experiences that one had. I think that really come out in one character. I couldn't pinpoint one particularly. I wish I had more Betsy. That's what I wish. It was something that, you know, I at one point said, she's so much smarter than I am. It's, you know, I can't live up to her.
Very back.
Whenever you set out to write, was the original goal, I want to write a fun or a moving story, or I want to write a story that makes a person feel a certain way, or was the goal, I want to write a story about North Arkansas, or I want to write a story about women's history, or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did know that I wanted to write a story about the Ozarks. Last week I presented at Capitol where I taught almost 12 years, and a student at the end asked a question that was like, oh yeah, I forgot why that was so important for me to do that. She said, what's the Ozarks like? I don't, you know, and I was like up against that for 12 years, you know, just always, and so I definitely knew that I wanted to do the Ozarks. The first version of this was much more Latin American and difficult. I think Hemingway has saying something about the first draft being for the writer and the other drafts being for the reader. And I do think it became more readable and probably less literary in some ways. And, you know, there's one narrator versus there were various narrators and that sort of things. Question. I've written one children's book, Thea the Fabulous, and I've got some more ideas. The illustration part's really hard, so if you know how to give illustrators, you should. I can be the writer and illustrate.
You mentioned earlier about how you were like told not to do the creative writing in your second language and stuff like that. Is that something you're planning on pursuing in the future? Because you said you wish you hadn't listened.
Poetry comes out that way in Spanish for me. Novel writing does not. And so, Natalia and Annie and I undertook this translating the novel endeavor that also was something that really that was an important step for breaking down the process of a novel in a different way. I think it made me look at it.
I know as a writer, you kind of have to like research a bunch of different things too.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love my background is with Chilean literature, but it's very much the political climate with that. So I have a background that's like super diving into newspapers, and I to them. So, we've talked about this in some of my classes before with some of the readings from women, the connection between the time of motherhood, and it definitely has made me more structured. I've always been structured with my time, but it has also been something that's been very fruitful in terms of creativity, I suppose. And I was telling my class yesterday, and it sounds really cheesy to say out loud, but it's true, that that a lot of mothers will say, like, that they love their children before they were born, and that's true. But I also I didn't know I was coming back here, but I was somehow writing to my students here before I knew that too. So that's not, the two feel very related somehow. There's a Spanish author that I love that she talks about, motherhood and novel writing together. And I think there's a big connection too.
So what is one thing you want your students to take out of it?
Ellen is always. So so the transformation part, and that to be attentive that we get there. Journey is the amazing part. Yeah, and we do lots of antiquing to get inspiration. So I'm going to continue to work on this next book this summer. Oh, a Aussie view.
It might be about time to come up here and buy some books, have some signed books. I believe, Natalia, are you running the shop? Is that, raise your hand for everybody. So Natalia is going to be helping sell books. They run $25,
No,
right?
20.
It's like this sort. So there's cash, Venmo, Cash App, and then alongside that there are snacks in the back, and we can kind of a little bit. Before that, however, I'm going to turn over briefly the microphone to Hannah. And company, sorry.
So, a group of honors college students wanted to do something. You done for us. It's an art, it's not a history report. Yes, a group of honors students got together and created the cover of the novel out of recycled textiles, buttons, and embroidery projects. So, thank you for saying. Spend lots of money on her.
All right, let's get some cake, buy some books. Come on. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay.
They're talking about the painting, right? And I'm just like, oh. The guy sitting next to me taps me and says, I signed the back. Oh, what does that have to do with it? You know? I can't. Fine, Cheyenne. Hey, man, I just saw him. Ready to see it.
I just not ready.
Both of them. For Saunders, too.
I just want that.
That's me. All right. Go around. No. And you just kind of distance to the other side without colliding.